Welcome to Trans Truth, the podcast dedicated to dispelling myths, fear, and ignorance about transgender people. From time to time, we'll also be sharing items of interest to the transgender community, from political and news events to health, fashion, and beauty. Also, please be sure to follow and share the Trans Truth podcast on Facebook. And now, here is some news and commentary that should be of interest to our listeners. Welcome back to Trans Truth. I am your host, Kelly, and this week, Jerry Ann is on assignment. So we're doing another whole episode on news events. There's just been so much happening, so we're going to look into a bunch of it. First of all, this just in another stunning defeat for ignorant and hateful Republican politics, the voters in Omaha, Nebraska have turned out 12-year incumbent Mayor Gene Stothert and elected County Treasurer John Ewing Jr. as their new mayor. Mayor-elect Ewing, who received more than 56% of the vote to Stothert 43, is the first black candidate elected to the mayor's office in Omaha history. That's noteworthy enough, but why, you ask? Is Aunt Kelly fixing to go on about this? I'm glad you asked. It seems that in the final weeks of the campaign, Stothert and a conservative political action committee flooded the media with anti-trans ads similar to those seen in the 2024 presidential election. One TV ad claimed that Ewing, and stop me if you've heard this one before, stands with radicals in favor of boys and girls' bathrooms in sports. Separately, a mailer sent out by the newly formed Political Action Committee Omaha Leadership Fund claimed that Ewing wants to transition minors without their parents' consent and is backed by radicals who will allow men in girls' sports and bathrooms. In other words, same shit, different day. Now, before we start celebrating, let's look at this a little deeper. As we will see a bit later in this episode, a recent Pew Research poll shows that most Americans, 66% in fact, are against trans athletes competing against those assigned female at birth. That number is up 8% in just 2 years. So I don't believe we can chalk up Ewing's win to a sudden shift in anti-trans sympathies. And, as we'll see later in this episode, we believe that it would be a strategic mistake to think that it was. No, I believe that, as we've seen in several recent elections, where the right-wing nuts have had their asses handed to them, the Omaha voters are seeing through the hate-mongering and lies that has been such a staple of Republican politics for the last several years. By the way, the Ewing campaign made an utterly brilliant repost on X with an image showing Stottert's face peering up at the viewer under a bathroom stall door with the caption, "Gene is focused on potties. John is focused on potholes." You got to see this one, so we're definitely putting a link to it in the episode notes. My point is that someone finally figured out that it's the real issues, the kitchen table issues, that voters actually care about. All right, calm down, bitches. I am not saying that trans issues don't matter. But I am damn sure pointing out that unless and until our allies start getting themselves elected and stop falling for the bait the GOP keeps dangling for us, we are not going to get anywhere.
And I saw this morning where one of them is pretty well known, one is arguing, fighting like crazy over men being able to play in women's sports. I said, I thought that was tried. I thought that was about a 95%, I think it's a 95% issue. But in a way, I want them to keep doing it because I don't think they can win a race. And I tell the Republicans, I said, don't bring that subject up because there's no election right now. But about a week before the election, bring it up because you can't lose.
Okay, more good election news. Lambda Legal reports that on Tuesday, May 13th, a Montana court struck down a 2023 state law that bans life-saving, gender-affirming care for pediatric patients diagnosed with gender dysphoria. The lawsuit against Montana Senate Bill 99, brought by the ACLU and Lambda Legal on behalf of Phoebe Cross, a 17-year-old trans boy. In granting summary judgment, Montana District Court Judge Jason Marks found that Senate Bill 99, quote, violates the constitutional rights of transgender youth who are seeking gender-affirming care and of the healthcare professionals who are providing that care, end quote. Judge Marks went on to observe, quote, defendants are unable to clearly and convincingly establish that a bona fide health risk exists. They have not put forth any evidence showing major medical organizations in the United States have changed their stance on gender-affirming medical care. Instead, they argue that no medical consensus exists on the benefits of gender-affirming care. This is the incorrect standard. The question is whether a medically acknowledged bona fide health risk exists, end quote. And as an aside, as we have pointed out over and over again, the professional community is entirely in agreement on what the standard of care should be. While this is arguably a significant victory, the court's decision was made on constitutional grounds. The argument that the state has no right to insert itself into decisions made between pediatric patients, their parents, and their caregivers. What the court did not address, and alas probably could not address, is the fact that ignorance of the standard of care is rife among right-wing elected officials and the people who vote for them. To wit, Montana Governor Greg Gianforte's comments on the decision, quote, while their young minds and bodies are still developing, they should not be subjected to experimental and permanent, life-altering medical and surgical procedures, end quote. We would like to point out to Governor Gianforte that the age-appropriate, gender-affirming care measures that are a part of the standard of care are neither experimental nor permanent. And Judge Marks has explicitly told you as much. I'll say it again. The Republicans have done an absolutely masterful job of exploiting the fear and ignorance of their voters. Somehow, that overwhelming consensus of the medical, psychiatric, and psychological communities is still not a part of these legislative actions and legal proceedings. And until it is, I believe that we're going to see mixed results in these legal and legislative fights. So my question to our listeners is, how do we deal with that? Please send your comments, ideas, questions to info@transtruth.info. More election news. A recent story in the Texas Tribune shows us that the kind of ignorance is still going strong in the Texas state legislature. Representative Ellen Troclair, an Austin Republican, explains, House Bill 229 strictly defines men and women based on their reproductive organs they were born with, and orders state records to reflect this binary. The bill, titled the Women's Bill of Rights, lays out the, quote, biological truth for anybody who is confused. Like most right-wing nuts and the people whom they elect to public office, Representative Troclair is not just confused, she's ignorant, or at least she plays ignorant in order to get votes from her fearful and ignorant base. She's also confused, it seems, about rights, stating that the, quote, bill will ensure women's rights aren't eroded by activists as more people come out as trans and non-binary, end quote. It's not pie, Ellen. Me having the same rights as you does not mean you get any less. USA Today is reporting that Erin De Niro, the daughter of actor Robert De Niro, has come out as transgender. In an interview published in the April 29th issue of Them magazine, Erin talked about her transition, as well as life as being a child of one of Hollywood's biggest stars. We should note, predictably, that social media has been abuzz about Mr. De Niro's support for his daughter, and just as predictably, much of that buzz has come from triggered right-wing nut snowflakes with, yes, predictably, juvenile insults and epithets. Yo, wingnuts. Yous might want to be careful what yous say about a man's children. If yous don't, things could happen. You know, things. Published in a post on the Scientific American's blog network in 2019, this article just came across our radar. The article, by Simone D. Sun, entitled Stop Using Phony Science to Justify Transphobia, might well have been aimed at Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and other Republicans fanning the flames of fear and ignorance about gender identity. The article is highly recommended reading, and a link to it is, as always, in the notes for this episode on www.transtruth.info. Fair warning for our transphobic listeners. The article uses a lot of big words to explain the actual science behind the professionally accepted understanding of the diagnosis and treatment of gender dysphoria. And finally, before we move on to more sensible, more credible, our next story, let's be fair to the right-wing nuts. Phony science is all they've got. And being, let's call it, less educated, they do tend to fall for science-y sounding nonsense. Now, from the you can't make this shit up file, Dallas's Fox affiliate, KDFW, reported that on March 13th, State Representative Stan Gertis, a Republican from Smithville, saying that he had heard stories, announced that he had filed the, quote, Forbidden Unlawful Representation of Role-Playing in Education Act, or the Furries Act. Here's a clip provided by Texas Representative James Tallarico during an Education Committee hearing.
Can you name a school where it has been confirmed that students are using litter boxes?
Well, what we do with this bill is we prevent that from happening, but what we don't take out.
Can you name a school where it has been confirmed that students are using litter boxes? This was at the top of your press release. This was mentioned when you introduced this bill, created quite a stir. So I'm asking, can you name a school where it's been confirmed that there are litter boxes being provided to students?
For this purpose, no, I cannot.
Your tweet about this bill was flagged by the app itself under their community notes, and their fact check said sensationalist claims about furries literally behaving as animals and receiving accommodations such as litter boxes have been repeatedly debunked as hoaxes. Is that correct?
It was flagged on, community notes.
Okay. I find it concerning that these types of debunked conspiracy theories are being used by politicians at the highest levels of our government, including in this legislature, who know that they're incorrect. Are you aware that Governor Abbott said, quote, "Kids go to school dressed up as cats with litter boxes in their classrooms"?
Sure.
Are you also aware that when the governor was asked by the Dallas Morning News to name a single school where this happened, he couldn't? And PolitiFact called this a pants-on-fire false claim started by online rumors?
Okay.
Do you think it's a good use of our time to write laws based on debunked internet conspiracy theories?
Well, this isn't. This piece of legislation before us covers that, among other things that are true.
My concern is that instead of holding a hearing about student mental health, instead of holding a hearing about school closures across Texas, we are spending precious legislative time toward the end of this legislative session on a bill called the Furries Act. And honestly, Representative Gertis, this whole thing is just weird and honestly a little creepy. And I think that's the point, because this is all, in my opinion, a manufactured, debunked smear campaign against our Texas public schools. Governor Abbott has used this litter box rumor to paint our schools in the worst possible light. He even used the litter box conspiracy theory to push his private school voucher bill. These culture war attacks are nothing more than an effort to discredit our public schools to justify defunding those public schools. Texas librarians are not grooming kids, Texas teachers are not indoctrinating kids, and Texas schools are not providing litter boxes. And I think the most disappointing part about all this is I think you know that.
Two things. One, I'd like to highlight one of Representative Tallarico's statements. Quote, "I find it concerning that these types of debunked conspiracy theories are being used by politicians at the highest levels of our government, including in this legislature, who know that they are incorrect." Unquote. Yeah, we've been concerned about that for a while now, James. I've had to repeatedly reassure my cat that there are no Haitians living anywhere near us. And two, did you all notice the laughing in the background as Mr. Tallarico cited some of the more, laughable parts of Mr. Gertis's announcement about the bill? I'm not sure if that's a good sign or a bad sign that people are laughing at politicians during official proceedings in the legislature. Nevertheless, I think we may have found a new hero in Austin. In a May 7th Facebook post, Representative Tallarico said the following about the passage of House Bill 3, the School Vouchers Act. Quote, "Greg Abbott has awakened a bipartisan, pro-public education movement. The same day he signed his billionaire voucher scam into law, Texans rejected the anti-public education extremists in school board races across the state. A group of billionaires, Jeff Yass, Tim Dunn, Ferris Wilks, and Betsy DeVos, are on a mission to dismantle public education in Texas. Their strategy is simple. 1. Discredit public schools, then 2. Defund our public schools. For years, these billionaires, mega donors, have executed a smear campaign against our public schools. They paid politicians to call our librarians groomers and accuse teachers of indoctrination, with the ultimate goal of privatizing our schools with a voucher scam. Last Saturday, they finally achieved their goal when Greg Abbott signed a voucher bill into law that will defund our public schools. Now, when Jerry Ann is back in the next episode, we'll be talking at some length about the impact of that voucher scam. Basically, it takes public tax money away from public schools and gives it to the people who would rather their child went to private schools. Now, typically, That's rich, wealthy donors who don't need that money, which is arguably offensive enough, but their real goal is dumbing down their electorate still more. But as Abbott was clinking glasses with his billionaire mega donors in the governor's mansion, something else was happening that same day. On Saturday, voters across the state headed to the polls to elect their local school boards. Anti-public education groups like Moms for Liberty and Patriot Mobile, backed by the same billionaires, spent big money to try and buy those seats. Extremist school board candidates ran on culture wars, banning books, bullying students, and bashing teachers. But they lost. End quote. Mr. Tallarico also provided a clip that should resonate with proud Texans.
The governor and his billionaire mega donors may scare some legislators in this Capitol, but they don't scare us. I'm a former middle school teacher. I don't scare easily. And Texans don't scare easily. So if they want to come for public education, we've got 4 words for them. Come and take it.
Now, we saw the very same thing in Wisconsin's Supreme Court race recently, where a record amount of money was spent, including $20 million from Elon Musk alone, trying to defeat Susan Crawford, a liberal circuit court judge in Wisconsin's Dane County. Think of it. The richest man in the world could not buy a win for Crawford's opponent, the Trump-endorsed Brad Schimmel. The Wall Street Journal is referring to results like this as MAGA backlash. The Journal's editorial board wrote late on April 1st and called Crawford's win, quote, the second sign in 2 weeks of a political backlash against the Trump presidency, end quote. It said that all politics is local, and a couple of recent trends at the local level are giving me hope. The school board elections that Representative Tallarico was talking about, and the storms of angry constituents confronting Republican congressmen and senators at town halls in the districts that elected them. Well, at least in those districts where the congressmen were brave enough to even hold town halls. From CBS's Face the Nation.
For an hour in Iowa, a room full of Senator Charles Grassley's constituents ganged up on the 91-year-old Republican.
Do your job, Senator. Yes! Obey the Supreme Court.
They're furious, and they want answers on issues from Social Security to deportation.
So, listeners, do you think that we're seeing the bow wave of a turnaround in voter sentiment? Fox News recently aired an interview with conservative activist Jamie Franklin, wherein they discussed congressional Democrats' recent reintroduction of the Equality Act, which, if passed, would make being transgender a protected class. See if this sounds familiar.
I'm telling you, as a Republican, a piece of me loves to see them double down and die on this hill because it'll make for an easier midterm and a better 2028 for us.
Now, we talked about the Democrats falling for this bait in the general election last fall, and how even a rube like Donald Trump can see that.
And I saw this morning where one of them is pretty well known, one is arguing, fighting like crazy over men being able to play in women's sports. I said, I thought that was tried. I thought that was about a 95%, I think it's a 95% issue. But in a way, I want them to keep doing it because I don't think they can win a race. And I tell the Republicans, I said, don't bring that subject up because there's no election right now. But about a week before the election, bring it up because you can't lose.
A February poll conducted by Pew Research that we referred to earlier has seen a marked uptick in the number of Americans who favor more restrictions on transgender people. On the question, should government require trans athletes to compete on teams that match their sex at birth, 66% of the respondents agree. That's up 8 points since 2022. Other questions about typical trans-related issues, bathroom assignment, healthcare for minors, etc., show similar changes in public sentiment. Thank you, Representative Mark Takano and Senator Jeff Merkley, the two primary sponsors of the bill. But gentlemen, let's read the room and stop leading with our chin. At present, the issue is clearly a loser, and this is coming from a couple of trans women. Focus on the issues that you can win on. When we've returned statesmanship and sanity to the federal government, we can work on helping the voters understand these issues and then pass these important protections into law. Finally, one of my favorite actors, Pedro Pascal, has been taking a bit of a beating in social media of late for his very public support of his trans sister, Lux, since she came out in 2021. You'll see more than one comment from me calling out the haters for their fear and ignorance that they feel so compelled to display whenever someone makes a supportive post about Pedro and his sister. Not that Pedro needs my support. I think he made his position pretty clear in a recent interview at the Cannes Film Festival.
The people that try to make you scared, and fight back. And this is a perfect way to do so in telling stories, and don't let them win. Don't let them win.
This is the way.
This is the way. You have been listening to Trans Truth, the podcast that speaks the truth about what it means to be transgender. If you are transgender yourself, you have a friend or loved one who is transgender, or if you are simply looking to understand more about the transgender experience, we hope that you have found this episode to be informative and enlightening. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us at info@transtruth.info. Copyright 2025, Trans Truth.